Welcome to The Frontier. The Frontier is an exploration of the post-COVID-19 consumer products landscape through the minds of the pioneers of the industry. Like all industries, the consumer products space is experiencing a massive shockwave as a result of COVID-19, and we created the Frontier video interview series to listen to and document for the broader community the perspectives from the field during this extraordinary time in history. My name is William Hood, and together with my co-founder, Jill Steib, we hope you will both enjoy and value the Frontier. This afternoon, my dear friend Tara Berkeley and I are very fortunate to be at the home of Jon Sebastiani, also with Kevin Murphy in beautiful Sonoma Valley for a socially distanced discussion. Jon, thanks so much for having us here today. It's just stunning, and Kevin, thank you for being here as well. Really appreciate it. Pleasure. So, Jon, you grew up around here, is that right?
I did. I grew up just down the hill here, where the family's vineyards, Sebastiani Vineyards, were founded in the 1800s, and it's an old school Italian family. I was put to work at a very young age in the vineyards, and kind of grew up through high school working in the vineyards for my family, and after college came back and worked for the family. I'm a member of the fourth generation, so it's really a lot of pride within the heritage of how everything came to be. The family got its start in Tuscany, Italy, where my great-grandfather learned to make wine with the monks in Lucca, and he kind of eventually made his way to Sonoma. And really the terroir and the landscape and the weather patterns here are really similar to Tuscany, and he kind of came back to his true love of growing and planting grapes in the late 1800s. So it's a lot of heritage here and history, and just a real honor.
That's a beautiful story. I had the same feeling driving up here. I've spent time in Tuscany, and the landscape reminds me very much of Tuscany in the summer. And it sounds like those entrepreneurial genes have not been diluted over 4 generations. Were you very involved in the family wine business?
I was. I always remember really yearning to be the entrepreneur. And even when I was a kid working in the vineyards, I would shovel the red dirt and put it into small canisters and sell it at the tasting room. So I always had that spirit. I always wanted to understand more about the commercial side of the business. And the wine business is a very romantic, glamorous industry. It's a crowded industry, but over the years, it really is the type of product that allows you to tell a story. It honors the heritage of a family, and it's really usually a family-wide enterprise. And so in the roots of Sonoma and Napa, for that matter, you really date back these terrific family stories and origins that go back to France or Italy. And what's really magical about this industry is that even today, there are many families that are in their second or third, or in my case, fourth generation, where the children want to come back and work in the family business.
That's awesome. So I know red meat goes well with wine, obviously, especially a good cab. But how did growing up in the family wine business leading to you founding Crave Jerky?
It is a very interesting story for sure, from one extreme to the other, right? The highbrow nature of wine to, at the time, the lowbrow nature of jerky. But candidly, within a family business, there are always difficulties between cross generations of leadership and sibling issues. And within my family, by the time I got to my generation, I was well into my 30s, so about half of my career was spent in the wine industry. I was president of one of our family operations. And we reached a point where the family decided to sell, and it was at my parents' generation. And when you're in a family business, it's really difficult to create your own identity. Typically, you're living in the shadow of your father or your grandfather. And there are, Coppola makes beautiful movies about the relationship between father and son in a difficult, competitive business dynamic.
Are you Sonny?
I hope not. But in my case, my father and his siblings decided to sell the operation, and that was when I was in my mid-30s. as somebody that never wanted to just follow in the trail of a larger family. And growing up in a large family business, in the 80s we were the second largest in the country, winery that is. The entrepreneurial energy in me, wanted to do something different. I wanted to carve my own path. And similarly, I have a fascination and a hobby of athletics. And so I like to run marathons and triathlons. And I was preparing for the New York City Marathon about the time that the family sold the operation. I was 35. I was like, what the heck am I going to do now? I was president of this big winery, and I had 500 employees, and I'd never worked for somebody else other than my family. So I knew I wanted to start my own business. And as I was training for this marathon, I was reaching for protein. And I knew that my body needed more protein to strengthen my legs and my body. And it just struck me that the jerky category in the U.S. was completely stale and nascent. It offered the consumer a wellness opportunity to build, strengthen their body with the protein. And what I really felt comfortable with is drawing the culinary aspects of the wine industry, of pairing flavors together, of storytelling, of talking about heritage. And my general thesis was there was an opportunity to recreate a better for you story in this very tired category. And we wanted to lead a renaissance into a better for you approach into meat snacks. And at that time, in 2010, there were only just a handful of competitors, in a really big category. It was a $5 billion category. And so we started the business in 2010, again, drawing the culinary inspiration of my background and applying more interesting flavors like black cherry barbecue and sweet chipotle to ordinary meat snack flavors, and really position the brand as a better for you option, similar to Chobani Greek yogurt or a Cliff Bar, not just the other incumbent jerky brands. And I feel very fortunate and lucky that I was at the right place at the right time when protein was really taking off. The consumer was ready for a better product, and Crave just was a rocket ship.
Congratulations. And obviously the story culminated with a sale to Hershey's.
It did.
For a great price, so well done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I love this family story, and that's really, it's just so inspiring to see how you took that and made it your own, and then you've created this new family. With Kevin and Jon, you've come together to create the Sonoma Family. So tell us how you two met and collaborated on that idea.
Sure. So interesting in hindsight how our relationship really intersects with the earliest days of Crave, perhaps even more so than we appreciated. Jon referenced his point in life in his mid-30s where he was figuring out his next step. Part of that was attending business school. We had some shared connections through Cal, and were put in touch by mutual acquaintances, really on the basis of Jon having an interest in becoming a private equity investor in the consumer arena, which is what I had been doing for a few years. And so we sat down for lunch to get to know each other, and it was really at that point a Q&A of, how would I get into the field? What's it like, day in the life? In your opinion, is this sort of a good use of my time to try to make this happen? And I think, frankly, the candid feedback was it's not the easiest transition at that point. But during that conversation, we were down having lunch at the Royal Exchange in downtown San Francisco. One of the parting gift he gave me, a few bottles of wine and a bag of what was essentially prototype Crave jerky. This is back in 2010 or so, and so I appreciated the gifts. We kept in touch, tried the jerky, and I think in pretty short order, I remember getting back to him saying, "This is a pretty good product." And long story short, the private equity door didn't open immediately. The Crave door did, and 10 years passed. We maintained a friendship and sort of professional connection. We saw each other at all the shows and a lot of dealings with familiar colleagues and whatnot. When it came time for me to think about my next step after 13 years at Encore Consumer Capital, really wanted to take some time and speak to people who I respected, but frankly who I I didn't think would put me in danger of accepting a job immediately. I wanted to just really kind of clear my head a little bit. At the time, Sonoma Brands, which at that point, going back to 2016, was essentially formed to develop the next generation of Crave. So brands that were developed on a clean sheet of paper within the four walls of Sonoma Brands, of which there are now 3 in the portfolio. So again, John's vision and the small team, many of whom were graduates of the Crave experience, to help him with that. But around the time we were speaking in 2018, that model had begun to evolve to be more of a traditional format, small consumer private equity firm focused more on third-party brands than the development of brands internally. So unbeknownst to me, frankly, as we started connecting more in depth, our areas of spheres of professional interest and experience were far more overlapping than I thought. So what was really a nice opportunity to reconnect with a good friend in the business world, after a few conversations, turned into, I think, in a way that might have even pleasantly surprised us, an opportunity for us to join forces professionally. And so we did. So I joined about a year and a half ago. Our third partner, Brian Nicholson, rounds out the trio of a small but talented team. We can touch on Crave again, but it certainly has come full circle and then some. I think we've referenced Coppola before. He's one of the few that has pulled off a really successful sequel, so we want to follow in his footsteps. But before touching on that, our small team and our focus is really bringing what we consider to be the most impactful level of expertise that one can package in a small team and in a small firm, and bring those to leading next generation brands across food, beverage, personal care. The story from a distance is somewhat similar, at least on the surface, to a lot of other great firms that we come across and in some cases collaborate with. But where we think we're distinct is the depth and the breadth of the experience that our small team brings, and the way we're able to apply that with, as situations warrant, smaller checks and in earlier situations, while maintaining the ability to get involved with some larger businesses, such as Milk Bar and Guayaquil. So we're really looking for alignment with founders. I think we place an extraordinarily heavily influence on interpersonal connections with founders. We know where the value is created, and that's where it is created. And so our job is to identify those opportunities and then bring our experience and our resources to bear to help founders and their small teams. And we've been very, very fortunate in a short period of time to invest in some wonderful brands.
Congratulations. Sonoma Brands is clearly established today as one of the go-to funds for early stage brands, and more than a fund, I would almost describe you as an incubator with all the support you provide to your portfolio companies. And Kevin, you have a big deal that you literally just announced a week ago. Can you tell us what that deal is?
Certainly. So if there was ever a collective effort, this would be that. So we repatriated Crave from the Hershey Amplify team. We're about several weeks into it, as you mentioned. The history here and the confluence of backgrounds and interests is it's almost too much to cram into a short discussion.
But in layman's terms, you just bought the brand that Jon founded, Crave, back from the large strategic acquirer, Hershey's.
We sure did. Yep. We couldn't be more excited. While there are plenty of reasons to be nostalgic and sentimental as a team, we tried to park those at the door and think like the business people that our investors demand and expect that we be. And so I think we realized it's a different day, it's a different time. The category has evolved in ways that don't necessarily make it easier to succeed in the category. But we've been able, true to our sort of kind of founding principles, have been able to assemble a phenomenal team, which includes some of the key members from Crave 1.0, and then a couple of newbies, such as myself. But in, as I say, a short period of time, an exceptional team that we think positions us to take on what, to be sure, is going to be a challenge. But we're working with a wonderful brand, I think with strong affinity among consumers, and frankly with a really nice opportunity to improve upon some areas that perhaps weren't of the focus that they might have been in recent years for the prior owner.
Well, congratulations. It's very exciting, and we'll have to come back in a couple of years and see what you've done with the brand and talk about it. So we have to ask you both, where were you guys and what were you doing when it hit you that this COVID-19 pandemic was real and that our lives were about to change in ways we never could have imagined?
We were, ironically enough, together on a small airplane going to Idaho Falls to look at the manufacturing plant that Crave was now making all of its product at.
Interesting.
And it was a co-packer that we never worked with, so we didn't have the benefit of those relationships. And I don't remember the exact day, but the first several days of March, the news is coming out left and right. It's very clear that this is a growing concern. Within our organization, we always want to place safety first. And on the airplane ride back, as we're in real time hearing what's happening amongst our peer group, from tech companies to schools and so forth, we just made the decision on the spot that we were closed. We wrote the email to our teams immediately shut down our offices, and transitioned into coach to our portfolio to make sure that again we were really sharing what we knew with our portfolio companies to create safety for their employees, but also beginning to dive into the dynamics of how are we going to run our business through an unknown crisis.
Yeah, definitely. Is that something that where you're encouraging your brands to collaborate with one another and to help each other through these times, and give best practices and keep the the momentum going?
Absolutely. There's a tremendous amount of cross-pollinating across our investment team and therefore across the portfolio companies. And an extension of your question, Tara, is we were at interesting junctures with a number of our portfolio companies, most of which are relatively new within the last year on average, and so many of which had significant initiatives underway with new distribution, team building, real brand enhancement work. And so a lot of those efforts were sort of culminating as this began to hit. And so it was very interesting for us to think about in the early days, are we on our heels? Are we on the front of our feet? Are we playing defense? Are we playing offense? What's going to happen? We have been definitely used the word fortunate as sort of a leading thought, and therefore grateful to be fortunate that a combination of just the foundational strength of our brands, the strength of the teams, and then in some cases just the positioning, the nature of the product, the channel in which the products are sold. Without any what seems to be truly shorter-lived impacts of this, but in ways where perhaps the current circumstances, as tough and tragic as they are, generally speaking, have really accelerated some of the trends that we invest behind, and I'd say all of the companies have performed better than one might have expected, but most have performed extraordinarily well. And it's only been a few months, and it's kind of hard sometimes to figure out exactly sort of what the drivers are. But we've got a pretty good read on that. And again, I feel like the acceleration of trends that we all sort of hold dear in our ecosystem got a really nice push. And our brands that focus on wellness, that focus on thoughtful indulgence, really different themes that I think have benefited well. They were in position to succeed, but hands down, the difference maker is just the nimble and skillful stewardship of the management teams that have sort of brought these through. So we're very grateful to have had the right entrants in the race, and more importantly to have the right teams to kind of oversee this. So
it sounds like your issues were less demand-oriented and more supply chain and business continuity oriented in your portfolio. Supply chain and business continuity.
Yeah.
For the most part, we were very fortunate not to have any supply interruptions. Of course, that was one of our first steps to ensure that supply chain was protected. And we went into extreme measures. We have a significant wine investment in our portfolio, and we sequestered the manufacturing teams away from their families, and even divided them into multiple teams so that in the event that there was an infection, that it wouldn't, knock the whole production team down. And so, both, again, putting safety first for the staff and their families, but also protecting supply chain, tried to make the appropriate steps for businesses that were sourcing ingredients from overseas. We began to build longer inventory levels just to make sure that if there was an interruption, that we had sufficient, supply.
Fantastic. John, I have to ask, I'm a wine lover, amateur wine collector. How are the mid and premium price wine markets doing through COVID? I know I've probably been drinking more and ordering more. What are you seeing?
We're seeing up and down the value chain demand surge by 30 to 50%.
Wow.
Equally?
Correct. So you're seeing the premium segment. Now, we don't play in the cult level,
right.
So I can't opine on the $1,000 bottles of Screaming Eagle. But their super ultra premium wines in our portfolio are equally as in demand as the fighting varietals in the lower tier price points. It's not unexpected that in quarantine people are drinking more, but at the same time we need to realize that the off-premise demand is not only servicing folks at home, but they're making up for the loss of revenue generated from basically the closure of every restaurant in America. And
That's
so
right.
that's a significant impact to brands that were disproportionately featured on premise. Those brands had to have a digital strategy set up immediately to take advantage of that increase in demand.
That's so interesting.
And that digital strategy, you talked about channel, and I know a lot of your brands are young brands and they were set up for e-commerce probably from the get-go. This may have accelerated that. Have you seen that channel strategy really change with this, and how are you meeting that demand?
I mean, you nailed it. We had a pretty significant disruption for a number of our businesses as to where, even if the ultimate demand was strong, how that demand was being met. Some of the retail partners or classes of trade to which our brands sell shut down, like a lot of other categories and brands. In the case of a milk bar, a deal that John led that he can speak to, that has essentially historically been a physical retail business. That all ended, at least momentarily, at a point in time, and then only slowly came back to a small degree. That brand did not have a CPG offering when we invested just several months ago, and its digital business was actually substantial, perhaps a little bit more than one might think for it. But in both cases, CPG went from zero to substantial, and digital went from a significant part of the business to really compensating and then some for the physical stores that
I've
closed.
enjoyed how that transition has gone. I love Milk Bar.
Yeah.
That is just amazing. I've watched it and it's just been phenomenal.
Yeah, one of the elements that was so near and dear to me about the wine industry is the ability of these wine brands to reach into their heritage and tell these fascinating stories. And there is something about how wine is made and where the grapes are grown and what oak you use and how you ferment and what the alcohol. There's so many nuances to wine making that make it such a romantic story to tell. And while we have many sort of hypotheses that we use before we make an investment, one of the dominant approaches is this concept of content. And do we have a brand that's truly magical, that truly has such passion, that can tell an interesting story? Now, baking, right, we have many home bakers that bake cakes and cookies, but Christina Tosi, the founder of Milk Bar, is such a special person, personality. She's so charismatic, and the minute that COVID hit and we shut down virtually every store from Boston to New York to DC, she pivoted her entire team and created digital content because she knew that there was a lot of needs that weren't being met, a lot of customers that wanted to figure out how to source their products. And she created the Bake Club, which was featured live every day, even through today and in the foreseeable future. At 2 o'clock Eastern, she has a YouTube channel and Instagram Live where she's filming a recipe on baking. And what happened is our digital business grew almost sixfold. And so again, like many of the wine brands, the digital performance has compensated for all loss of revenue generated from the closure of the brick and mortar stores. And I think, in this time where we're all home, we're looking for normalcy. We want excitement, and we want to laugh and smile. Baking and a brand like Milk Bar can bring that to us. And what we're also shocked by is the level of kindness that all of us are sharing with each other and with our colleagues from work and our family and our schoolmates. And Milk Bar is this great brand that employers are sending to their staff, or folks are sending to their kids or their parents, and all kinds of gifts just to say, I'm thinking about you, I miss you, here's something to make you smile.
I love that. We've been talking to a lot of people this week, and we've heard words like kindness, caring, empathy, and it's so warming to hear, and it's manifesting, these themes are manifesting themselves through the workplace, even though we're working from home. Our children, how they're interacting with their classmates, and at home with our families, as you mentioned. Jon and Kevin, we've talked about a number of trends. Health and wellness products experiencing a nice bump. Wine 30 to 50% up at all levels.
Yeah.
What do we think is going to stick after COVID? Are we experiencing a level of trial, and some of these there's going to be a higher base on the other side, or do we think it's going to be a one-time bump and back to normal? How do we think about that?
There's no doubt that certain categories experienced initial spikes, just out of kind of base needs and fear. But putting that aside, we obviously have a rooting interest in the case of our brands and our trends, that these be sustainable, and frankly, we think they are. We and I would definitely imagine that where sales growth has been pretty substantial, that some of that might be shorter lived, but that at the same time, we are looking at every opportunity for engagement with a customer to be just that, an opportunity to bring someone else to the brand. And if much like promotion in a grocery store, that coming out the other side we've increased the base but perhaps not sustained that level, that's just fine. But fundamentally, we are so focused on longer term durable trends to be sort of resonant and really latent within our portfolio companies, and sort of embodied by the founders. Our sense is that this situation and all of its the backdrop of sadness and somberness and tragedy, but what's emanating from that, like all tough circumstances, resiliency and empathy and just kind of perspective, we think that our brands and the types of brands we aspire to be associated with play into those. And as a result, our personal hope and our professional expectation is that there really will be a sustained lift for brands that have done the hard work to focus on things that matter, better for you product, removal of insidious ingredients, brands that do bring joy. These are things that they're sort of hard to develop in a sterile boardroom and white sheets of paper, but they're when founders passionately bring these things to their businesses, they have a way of sticking around because that's what people are embracing. So I think people are drawn even more so now to all things good and all things pure, and to the extent that our brands can aspire to be those things, they're well positioned.
We
agree, but I also love that Crave started as preparing you for a marathon, and all of these brands are preparing us for this marathon where we really need to rely on our bodies and the strength and the nourishment of our own bodies with these types of products, and that's going to endure for sure.
And how are you both doing personally at home with your families?
The silver lining in all of this has been the reality that we've just spent more time together, and it's almost a reset for us to prioritize what matters in life. And we can get very hung up on the performance of all of our portfolio companies and feel like we need to travel to New York for a 1-hour meeting. when we now realize that we're perfectly capable of effectively managing this through a Zoom call. We are spending more time with our children, the limited time that we have when they're at home, and cooking with them, and really enjoying the basics a little bit more. And so, from my standpoint, I also sit as the board chair of my daughter's school, and she's in 6th grade, and to see how a school can navigate this crisis and create a learning environment that will prevail through a quarantine and still really trigger enthusiasm and interest and curiosity within students is pretty remarkable. That teachers and the students and even kindergartners were on these Zoom sessions with their teacher, and it really is remarkable how the resiliency of all of us have come together to make not only survive but really thrive.
That's fantastic. And Kevin, what about you?
It's been an interesting ride. I think we were talking about this earlier with a colleague. There's something really unique, not so much in a good way, but in a real way about what we're all going through, which is that we're all going through it. I don't know, at least in
Worldwide.
Has that ever happened before? Really, something really good or really bad. And so there is something sort of almost liberating about that. Like you don't have time to be prone to self-pity, because intellectually you can't even go there. You just snap right out of it because you realize there's nothing there. And so I've felt fortunate from the get-go. Feel fortunate that on the personal front, I've got little 5-year-old identical twins at home, and my wife and I have been enjoying a lot of time with them. I'm probably a little bit more fortunate than my wife in that there's an escape hatch for me, which is a very pleasant one, which is work, and she doesn't quite have that, but there's special times that we probably won't even really appreciate how great they were until after the fact. Now, the course of 3 months of this, there are probably some things I probably wouldn't want to put on film for what's happened with that little collection of 5-year-old personalities and a feisty Irishman dad. But it's been really good, and again, you don't have to look too far to just realize how good you have it. And so I think it's interesting as we look at one another and friends. To the extent that people aren't burdened by real problems, like health problems specifically brought on by COVID or other circumstances that are much more challenging than, thankfully, what I've been forced to deal with, I've found that there's just been almost an instinctive quest for perspective, like taking care of yourself better, working out more, reading more, whatever just kind of calms the mind a little bit. So I've been trying to view it as an opportunity to sort of come out better on the other end, if that's even the way to visualize it. And thankfully I've been put in a position where it's up to me to make that happen, and I'm grateful for that.
I think we all have a lot to be grateful for. There's a lot of economic hardship out there right now. There's a lot of people directly with health issues or family-related health issues, and we're all clearly fortunate to be healthy and well, and we all work in industries where on the demand side things continue to roll. So I certainly feel blessed.
Absolutely blessed. And without, our industry loves to gather and hug a lot. We're used to hugging like every week. And so during this, for Sonoma Brands, how are you going to go about sourcing new deals and new types of companies? And where are you going to find them? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's. Right now we are seeing a couple of different approaches. One is within the network that Sonoma Brands already plays in. As an investor, we are just simply doing introductory calls via Zoom or WebEx. We surprisingly are able to get to the root of the founder's passion and really uncover the real value proposition of brands still in a distance environment. And so we're able to source. At the same time, we must realize that in the environment right now, there is cash scarcity. And so as an investor, our primary focus is going to be on our portfolio right now and protecting each company. And as Kevin noted, some are thriving in this environment, and some that were skewed a bit more towards traditional retail distribution aren't struggling to the point of death, but are struggling a little bit more with the general trends of foot traffic back through retail. That being said, we are active right now. Crave was our most recent transaction.
That was easy to find.
That was easy to
That
find.
was pretty
We
easy.
knew a little bit about that once.
but at the same time, we still see the same level of sourcing strategy that we had prior to COVID being played out right now.
I would just add that it's there is a great deal of uncertainty as to what happens in the future. So I think we just naturally spend a lot of time trying to decode whatever is in front of us. But I'll at least acknowledge that who knows where this goes. If we have a surprisingly nice kind of recovery from what we're dealing with in all respects, that's great. But it could take so many twists and turns that I think the combination of extreme effort and even more extreme humility is sort of the recipe for me. Left foot, right foot, and just be as thoughtful as you can, because it's really hard to know what comes in the fall, what comes beyond that, and we're all hoping for the best, and I think we take some comfort in that. We're going to do our best to deal with uncertainty as it presents itself, and registering the fact that there's still a good deal of that hanging out there.
What we know is that business travel will change permanently. A work from home environment will be much more permissible, even for old school folks like myself that grew up with my father tapping his watch when I would arrive in the morning and leave at night to make sure I was putting in a full 10 hours a day. That's changing. And with restaurants, we know that 2019, 55% of dollars spent on food were spent in restaurants. That is going to change, and it won't be swinging back immediately. So food will be consumed at home. It will be prepared at home. We think that's a blessing, but we are going to be looking at companies that play into that reality. Bella has a few words to share as well. So, Bella, is that what you really think? Bella would like to add.
Hardly
It's like a
disagrees.
seasoned
Those are the
professional.
wisest words any of us have spoken all day. Well done,
No
Bella.
objection here. That's right.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time, sadly, I have to say, because I'm enjoying this discussion so much. But is there anything else either of you or both of you would like to share with the broader community? Any words of advice or wisdom as we continue to go through this pandemic?
I would just more geared towards newer brands. I guess my thoughts would be is it's very heartening to see that really strong vision behind a brand means something in all sorts of different weather patterns, so to speak. It's brands that have a story to tell, that have a product that improves upon alternatives, or that brings kind of brings something different than what a consumer expected. It's nice to see that if they're constructed properly, they don't need to be quite as dependent upon certain outcomes or certain channels as we might have been groomed to expect before. So a focus on fundamentals, that's always been a thing in every sport, every facet of life, but boy, is it at least in my view, is it showing itself now to be as important as anything could possibly be.
Well, I would add that one of the things that I found so compelling about the food and beverage ecosystem when I entered it with Crave is the sense of collaboration amongst each other, and really the sharing of ideas, of solutions. And I think that we're in a time right now of uncertainty where we should lean on each other. And while we may be a competitor to a different brand, we're all in this together. We all want to support each other in building the overall industry. So I would say to the entrepreneurs out there, lean on each other.
That's great advice, John and Kevin. Thank you so much for hosting us today and for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you both for the
Enjoy
It's
the
really
program.
nice to see you.